frankly, I think she ran an excellent race here. She did about as good as you could expect anybody to do, where you've got Donald Trump getting a significant majority of those registered Republican voters. She played the only hand that she had, but the cards were relatively weak, and she did an excellent job with a weak hand. She's going into South Carolina where her cards are even weaker, not because she's not popular in the state and she's better known, but South Carolina's electorate, they elected Donald Trump significantly in 2016 and in 2020. And I don't think they'll see any reason why they should throw him overboard, even if it is for a governor that they know and like.
Your poll, Andrew Smith, of a little less than 2 weeks ago had them within single digits. That changed pretty quickly as candidates began dropping and as they moved through Iowa. When are we going to start seeing indications of how the Ron DeSantis votes were distributed? And how did that change so quickly in a week's time to go from single digits to what we got last night?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Donald Trump had about 40 to 42% of the electorate in New Hampshire locked up a year ago, if not 8 years ago. So his voters were there. And then you had a lot of people that were looking at other ones. You had the anti-Trumpers with Chris Christie. You had Nikki Haley trying to play a middle road. You had the Trump light candidates with Ramaswamy and DeSantis. But those in our polling, when Christie, if you ask Christie voters who their second choice was, it was Haley. And when he dropped out, they moved over to her. That's why she got this bump. But when first Ramaswamy and then DeSantis dropped out, their second choice was always Trump. So they drifted over to Trump. It was not a question in this election of Trump versus everybody else, or the anti-Trump. It was Trump, the Trump light, and the anti-Trumps. And the anti-Trump went for, instead of Trump light, they went for full strength Trump.
How about that? Sounds like that 30-point spread that I mentioned in the Emerson poll in South Carolina might still be the case. How about no labels? They've already come to New Hampshire a few times. I've seen Joe Mathieu up there holding events on a potential third-party run. There's something New Hampshire-y about that, Andrew. If we get to Super Tuesday, do you take that group at its word that they will run a candidate? And how could it possibly work when they aren't going to be likely on the ballot everywhere?
Well, I think any third party is going to be a spoiler. And basically, you're going to have to start to look at who they're drawing votes from. And it's really way too early to start to even think about those things. Voters aren't paying that much attention, frankly, to the general election in the fall yet. They are in the early states like New Hampshire, Iowa, and then now coming up South Carolina. But the third party is going to have a very, very difficult challenge. As I mentioned, the voters in the United States can rationalize why their party is as bad as the candidate is better than the other party's candidate. And if you think back to third party candidates in recent memory, it was Ross Perot. He got 19% in 1992 with two kind of
amazing
candidates, but he didn't get a single electoral vote. He was a spoiler at best, not a really credible candidate for winning the election.
Not that we don't already have potential spoilers out there, right? RFK Jr., we've got third-party candidates that I could rattle off here that don't necessarily carry the no labels brand. What's the difference?
Not much, actually. I think RFK Jr. is probably in a better position than the no labels brand. They're not a known commodity. They're not a party in the traditional sense of a party. They're a movement, so to speak, at best. But they're going to need somebody who is a very charismatic person, very popular, very well known, who's going to be able to lead the charge. Because I don't think people are going to go and vote for a relatively unknown candidate that they don't know how they're going to govern, who will have no governing party in Washington, than looking at who their own candidate is and saying, you know what, I'll just stick with the tried and true, even if I don't really like it.
So add up RFK Jr., Cornel West, and the rest. Is there already enough potential interruption for Joe Biden to worry about? Sounds like yes.
Yeah, I think there is. I think that both candidates have to worry about this. It's just really too early for us to say who it's going to bite the hardest. You can make an argument both ways, but I think it's too early because, frankly, again, voters aren't paying attention much to this. Voters will pay attention to the elections when they have to, and that's usually just before the election. The money issue is important for the candidates and the campaigns. How do you keep this thing rolling if your your candidates aren't that popular? How do you keep voters engaged when they're looking at their candidates and neither party really is in love with their party's candidate? How do you keep them focused? And that's a hard thing to do.
Strikes me, Andrew, that if Donald Trump wanted to give this the appearance of shutting down the Republican primary, you just go ahead and announce a vice presidential pick right now. Remember when Ted Cruz tried to pull that off? Just form your own ticket before you even get to a convention. I don't know if you see that happening. It feels like something very Trumpy thing to do. Who's on the top of that short list? Will geography matter this time? Or are the normal rules in place, or does Trump seem to be the exception to that as well?
I think Trump's not likely to pay attention to the traditional things like choosing somebody from the other wing of your party or choosing somebody for their ability to draw votes in a battleground state or a large battleground state. I frankly think he's going to get a loyalist, somebody who's going to parrot the message that he has, who's not going to stray or say something that he might disagree with. And he's going to want somebody who's going to back him up in those legal troubles that he's got. So I think he's going to want somebody who's got an oath of loyalty to him. And I don't think that that's going to turn off the Trump voters. In fact, I think his supporters, if anything, want to see somebody like that rather than, somebody from another wing of the party.
So you're talking at least Stefanik, a couple of other names around there. Kerry Lake might ring true to you. What do you think, Andrew?
I think that both of those people could be on his short list. They'll probably have to swear on a stack of Bibles that they'll pardon him if need be. But I think it's going to be tough for them to find somebody who has some national credibility, who's with Trump, who's not going to stray away from Trump, and who's not going to look like somebody who's been effectively politically neutered if they join the campaign.
So then, if it's the Trump campaign and no rules apply, that choice that's so important for presidential candidates probably won't move the needle in the polls, right? This is the most stable looking race that we've ever seen when it comes to Trump's base.
I think so. And actually, if you look at the political science on it, the vice presidential pick generally doesn't make much difference at all. As John Nance Gardner famously said, it's not worth being not worth a warm bucket of, as he said, spit, but he meant something else. It's not something that really the voters are waiting for. It's kind of a news story a bit. It's something to talk about during the convention when it's traditionally announced, but it's just not that big of a deal. And but in this case, we have two very old candidates for whom the choice of vice president looms a little bit larger than might be the case if the president is 50 years old. And yes, that's going to be, I think, the discussion is how young, how vigorous, and how this person would look as potentially a president before the end of the current president's term.